Hi, I'm Tara, and welcome to Let's Do Books. Email me at tara@thelesbianreview.com with any questions or comments, or come join the Facebook group, The Lesbian Review Book Club. I am so excited today because Jeannie Levig is back. She is the author of 5 lesbian books, the latest of which is A Wish Upon a Star, which is out everywhere from Bold Strokes Books. Welcome, Jeannie.
Hi, Tara. Thank you for having me again. I'm glad the last one went well enough that you invited me back.
Okay, well, we're friends now, so you're always welcome
yes,
back.
Yes, we are. Oh, good, because I have some other ideas, too.
Oh, all right. But we're here today to talk about a pretty controversial topic in lesfic. So do you want to share what it is and why we're even talking about it?
Yes, I'd be happy to. The topic is infidelity, or in another word, cheating. And the way it came up was in the last podcast that I did with Tara. We spoke about general fiction books, which are books that don't fall into any particular category. And one of the books I chose was Life and Death by M. Ullrich, which has an infidelity piece in it that it's one of the reasons I love the book. And I will talk more about that in this podcast as well. But the way it's handled was just very well done. And so after we were finished recording, Tara and I got to talking about that. And we got to talking about how controversial a topic infidelity is, or it seems to be, in lesbian fiction, and some of the reasons why that might be, and some of the ways it might manifest in different people's books and stories, in the reviews of the books that do tackle the topic. And so it just evolved into another podcast where we will be talking about that, the controversial element, and we will also be talking about and recommending some books that we each feel handle the topic either in a unique way or handle it well. Because, there's a way to handle it well, and then there's a way to handle it in a more destructive way. And so that's how this podcast came up.
So why do you think infidelity is hated so much in lesfic? Because I've never quite seen the vitriol for it in any other reading group or for any other genre as I have here.
If I had to just, I have a background in counseling, and so I've done counseling with a lot of different people, and then I have my own relationship background, which is quite varied. And so drawing from that to answer this question, I actually think some of it is the fact that, obviously in lesbian culture, and therefore in lesbian fiction, we're dealing almost exclusively with women. Not entirely. There are male readers of lesbian fiction, but the predominant readership of lesbian fiction, I would guess, is women. And I think because of the emotional makeup of women, generally speaking, I am making a generalization, I understand that. But generally speaking, the emotional makeup of women is different than the emotional makeup of men. And therefore, within female-female relationships, I think there's a higher expectation in the area of things that trigger emotions than there might be in straight relationships or even bisexual relationships between men and women. And so, and like I said, I've done no research on this. I've never read a study on it. This is just from couples counseling I have done with people, or even counseling of women in particular that have come through an experience with infidelity and who have been cheated on in their relationships. That's what I'm drawing this from. And so, take it with a grain of salt. Certainly don't think I'm trying to pass this answer off as anything scientific or, set in stone. It's simply an observation I've made. And so, within lesbian fiction, there is a very strong reaction from a lot of readers to books that deal with infidelity, and particularly if infidelity is dealt with in such a way that the cheater isn't severely punished for it. And even one of the books I wrote that dealt with infidelity, one of the reviews, and it will always stay with me, but one of the reviewers said in the review of it that, if there is a cheater in the book, we want the cheater, we being the readers, we want the cheater to lose the relationship, to never find love again, and to end up alone and destitute and ruined. And it's like, if that happens to the cheater, then the infidelity is more okay than if it doesn't. And the other thing I've noticed in some of the reactions to infidelity in lesfic is that if the cheating takes place, say that the character who is the cheater is with a man, and they cheat on the man with the woman, that seems to be more acceptable than if they cheat on a woman with a woman, and certainly than if they cheat on a woman with a man. And so I think there's a lot of layers to this topic, and I think there's a lot of triggers for readers that come up. Certainly somebody who has been cheated on is going to, if they're still feeling the hurt and the betrayal of that, they're going to be triggered by that in a story, especially if they've picked up the story for an escape and, a fun read. If there's no warning that that's what they're going to find in the book. And also, if there are a lot of people, even if it hasn't happened to them, there are a lot of people who are very frightened that it will happen to them. And so to read a story with infidelity in it, if that's something that they're very afraid of or afraid could happen, then they're going to have a reaction to it as well. And again, particularly if the cheater isn't adequately punished for the behavior.
Mm-hmm. So, with that, because I agree with you, and I don't really have any other speculation of my own. I haven't, especially because I haven't, as far as I know, I haven't had anyone cheat on me. I haven't cheated on anyone. I can say that part for sure, as that's my side of things. So I don't have any real personal experience with it. I know people that have experienced it or whatever, but because I haven't experienced it, I don't really have an opinion around it. But I do find that there are some really excellent books in lesfic that have cheating as a central theme and that might not even get picked up as a result. Mm-hmm. So with that, we each have 3 books that prominently feature it that we want to share today. Do you want to share the title of your first book? I
believe my first one is... What is my first one? I gave you the list. Okay. Sorry about that.
Okay, I'm going to intro... That's okay, I'm going to intro yours for you.
Thank you.
So your first book is Olive Oil and White Bread by Georgia Beers, and I'm just going to read the blurb for it, which I think is the blurb off of Amazon, right?
Yes, it's the official blurb for the book off Amazon and Goodreads. And other than the very end of it, I tweaked some, but Anyway, go ahead.
What happens to lovers after the happily ever after moment? What goes on behind the closed doors of a relationship once the commitment is made? What does romance turn into when the hands of time keep turning? Olive Oil and White Bread is a novel that dares to answer those questions. Angie Righetti is the daughter of a sprawling but close-knit Italian-American family. She's out, and they're proud. Jillian Clark's family is the white bread to Angie's olive oil. Stoic and emotionally buttoned up, they don't want to think about Jillian's sexuality. It's 1988 when they move in together on the brink of starting their careers. Like every couple at the start of their life together, they expect to live happily ever after. And for 23 years, life happens. They change jobs, buy a house, get a dog, and deal with money issues and the death of a parent. They fight, love, cry, play, make mistakes, have regrets, and try to be good to each other and to everybody else. Like most of us, they tumble into a routine that turns into a rut that leads to danger and distraction. This is a romance that begins where most romances end. So why did you choose this one?
I chose this one, clearly because it fits the theme we're talking about today. There is a moment in their 23 years together where one of the characters slips and has a cheating incident. Before I get to that, though, I want to talk about how amazing I think this book is generally because of what Georgia Beers does with the romance genre itself with it. Like the blurb says, most of the the romance genre in general tends to start where the book the story starts where the characters meet, and it goes through whatever conflicts they have getting together and falling in love and blah blah blah. And then the book ends with the happily ever after. And this book spans this couple, as it says, 23 years. It spans everything. You are there when they meet, and then it goes for 23 years. And it is such an accurate and such an exquisite representation of a long-term relationship, which we don't get to see certainly in lesbian romance very often, and even in lesbian fiction. With books, the lesbian fiction books that I've read, they tend to span a shorter period of time. And so to find a book that spans very accurately a 23-year relationship, and they're all the ups and downs, and there are high points. You get to see it all. It's not just you don't get to just experience everything that goes wrong in the relationship. And so by the time you reach that moment of infidelity, if you've been paying attention, like for me, I understood it. I understood completely what happened, and it wasn't just the one person's responsibility. And I shy away from the word fault, because generally speaking, I don't believe in fault. So it's not the one person's responsibility. As you're following the story, by the time it happens, like I said, I understood it. I understood what both characters were feeling. And Bierce does a beautiful job with that. In my opinion, this book, it doesn't represent one side or the other. And it doesn't paint the picture that the only one in pain is the one who was cheated on. And that's something in infidelity. If it's written deeply enough, the reader is going to understand, if they choose to, the reader's going to understand that there's a lot of pain involved in the cheating character, for the cheating character as well. Yes, there are habitual cheaters that, they cheat for different reasons. But in a story like this one, where it was really a one-time thing, and it's born out of the overall dynamic in the couple's relationship. And so it's not like the character who cheats just does it and is all happy-go-lucky about it and, hoping she gets away from it. She's in a lot of pain as well, both before and after, which is a lot of times that's the case with infidelity. When you're in a long-term loving relationship, even if you're the one who messes up, you don't feel good about it. And you don't feel good even before it happens. It's usually the result of, and I'm not saying it's the other partner's fault, I'm saying it's part of the dynamic of the relationship if you're heading in that direction, which I probably in this podcast is not going to be a very popular statement. And so,
well, it makes me think of, there's a book called Fierce Conversations, and it talks about how the breakdown in relationships is one of those things that a lot of people think happens suddenly, but it's actually gradually and then suddenly.
Exactly. And you don't always see it coming, everybody. And that's the other thing that Bierce does so beautifully in this book. These are two people, they both have jobs, they both have families, there's so much going on that, and one of the partners' focus is her job, which that isn't unusual. So Bierce does such a beautiful job with showing all facets of, first of all, a long-term relationship, and secondly, what happens when a relationship breaks down to this point. And then, and I don't want to give away the ending, but trying to think if it does in the blurb. Anyway, then she pulls off the ending. I'll just say that. You're not going to be disappointed with the ending. The ending fits so beautifully with what Bierce has built Angie and Jillian's relationship to be from the very start. Given that she wrote the characters the way she did, and she wrote the relationship the way she did, it's a very satisfying and it's a very realistic ending for this couple. The ending of the book, not the ending of the relationship. But it's really, I can't say enough about this book. And I read it quite a while ago. It was one of the early lesfic books I read. It's been out for quite a while. And I hadn't read it since. And so I really when I reread it for this podcast, I was even more floored by it than I was initially. I saw a lot more of the depth to it. Because when I first read it, like I said, it was one of the first ones, and I was just so excited about finding lesbian fiction. It's like I loved everything.
Yeah.
But now I really see just how wonderful and how beautifully crafted this book is. So I recommend it very, very highly. And especially for people who have been in long-term relationships. There's a lot you can glean from the way it's written. And there's a lot, like I was in 2 long-term relationships. One was 15 years and one was 10 years. And in both of those cases, I could see a lot of what I went through in some of the things that Jillian and Angie went through. And so, it can be educational as well.
Mm-hmm. So my first book is Flinging It by G Benson. So the blurb for that is, Fraser, head midwife at a hospital in Perth, Australia, is trying to make her corner of the world a little better by starting up a program for at-risk parents. Not everyone is excited about her ideas. Surrounded by red tape, she finally has to team up with Cora, a social worker who is married to Fraser's boss. Cora is starting to think her marriage is beyond saving, even if she wants to. Feeling smothered by a domineering spouse, she grabs hold of the program and the distraction Fraser offers with both hands. Soon the 2 women get a little too close and find themselves in a situation they never dreamed themselves capable of, an affair. As the 2 fall deeper, both are torn between their taboo romance and their morals, but walking away from each other may not be as simple as they thought. I really enjoyed this one. I'm a fan of G Benson anyway, so I picked it up right away, despite being a little like, I'm not super sure about this scenario. But I think it worked really well because it's a book that talks about cheating without any judgment either way. It's not condemning it. It's not praising it. I think it just really shows that, there are nuances to these things sometimes, that there aren't necessarily heroes or villains, although actually Cora's husband is kind of a villain because he likely has some kind of a narcissistic personality disorder or something like that, the way he controls Cora, the way he gaslights her. And so I think it also makes it quite easy for lesfic readers to get behind because, there is this asshole husband who is there and is emotionally abusive. But at the same time, even though he is like that, he wasn't one-dimensional either. He wasn't like a cardboard cutout villain. There were nuances to him as well because you could occasionally see these glimmers of the person that Cora had fallen in love with in the first place. And it was just really beautifully done. And I found myself rooting for Fraser and Cora, even though it was one of those like, how are they going to get out of this? They all work at the same place. It was really complicated. And, they start off with what's supposed to be a friends with benefits thing. And then, sometimes that doesn't always work either because, feelings can be real.
It's the heart wants what it wants.
Yeah, it does. But I also like this book because it wasn't overwhelmingly angsty. Like, there's definitely with a premise like this, it could have gotten really quite dark, but it's actually really funny at times because Gabby is she's a very funny person and she's a very funny writer. So I think, if you want to kind of dip your toe in, this might be a good place to start.
You brought up a good point in talking about Flinging It, that a lot of times it's easier for readers to digest an infidelity piece when the person being cheated on is an unlikable character in a lot of ways. And I've seen that in other books that deal with infidelity, whether the person being cheated on is male or female. There's one book that comes to mind where the girlfriend was really, not particularly likable. And that made it a little bit more digestible, I think, for some readers to, for the cheating to take place. It is a kind of a juicy rationalization, in my opinion, but it works. If you don't like the person being cheated on, you're less likely to feel too bad when it happens.
It's true. And in the case of this one, actually, I don't want to say that there was no angst, because there definitely was. Like, I actually wondered if they would even be able to remain friends because of how messy and complicated things got. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, it is a romance, so there is a happy ending. One other thing that I want to mention that I think is noteworthy is that this book handles bisexual awakening really well.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, as a bisexual person, I appreciated that, but it wasn't Cora cheating because, bi people are fickle and evil and cheat all the time, like some of the stereotypes that we see. She also doesn't leave her husband because she thinks all men are evil. And there isn't this whole like, oh, I've unknowingly been a lesbian the whole time, and then just like pave over her whole history of romantic and sexual attraction to men. Mm-hmm. She really slowly figures it out. And there's this beautiful moment when she really gets it that like, oh, yeah, she is bi. And it's so good and it's so important. And even that, it's worth picking up the book just to get that.
That's great. I'll have to get that one. I've been wanting to read some more of Benson, and so that'll be a good one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I totally recommend that one. So, your next book...
Life and Death by Matt Ullrich.
Would you like to... All right. So, I'm going to read the blurb for you. Memories and scars are the signs of a life well lived, and more often than not, our milestones are similar. Love, a first home, marriage, and a child. The same goes for Marty and Suzanne Dempsey, but happy memories and years of a life built together weren't enough to help their relationship survive the terminal diagnosis of their only child, Abigail. Coping in their own ways, Marty and Suzanne drift apart and eventually divorce after one finds comfort in the arms of a stranger. The expected and devastating death of their daughter has seemingly severed any ties that remain between them, but an insightful letter from Abigail gives Marty the one thing that seemed so elusive before: hope.
Okay. As I said, anybody that heard our previous podcast knows how I feel about this book. And so I'm only going to speak to the infidelity piece in this podcast since I fangirled the heck out of it in the last one.
You did.
But the infidelity piece in this book is, again, it's handled so well. And again, by the time I got to that piece, first of all, I think it's important to mention that it's really a good idea, in my opinion, to always make sure if there's infidelity in a lesbian fiction book that it's put right out there in the blurb, like Ullrich did. And it doesn't always work. The book I wrote that has it was right in the blurb, and people still got mad, but it does, but it does, it does help. It at least alerts the readers. And so even though I knew it was coming, by the time you reach that point in the plot that the infidelity takes place, again, it's completely understandable. And this book also speaks to what I spoke about in Georgia Beers's book. The person who is cheating is in just an enormous amount of pain herself. And so there's some compassion that's possible for the character. Mm-hmm. And clearly in a book like this, the way Ullrich develops the events that take place, and as it says in the blurb, they're going through a terminal illness with their child, and their child does die. And it's beautifully done because Ullrich makes it clear that these two women, they don't know how to take care of each other during this time period. They're both floundering. They're both in pain. They're both losing their daughter, and they couldn't help each other in any circumstance. They just don't have it. And so they do each turn in different ways to outside sources. And so by the time it happens, you get it. And then the thing that I really like about this book is they both get it eventually. Yes, it's the infidelity that, causes the divorce on the surface level. But when it all comes around, the one who is cheated on in the book, she even gets it. She doesn't make a big deal about it. She mm-hmm. realizes that, she wants her partner back, and she doesn't make a big deal about the cheating, because on a deeper level, she understands. She gets that it really didn't have anything to do with whether or not her partner loves her. And so and that's a unique realization to find in a book that deals with cheating, especially it's very non-traditional. Even in life, it's very non-traditional. There aren't a lot of people who would grasp that. And so that's one of the main things I love about the way Ullrich handled the infidelity piece in Life and Death. And it's just, again, the whole book is just beautifully written and well crafted. And so, again, I will always highly recommend this book.
It is the best book that I wasn't able to finish. And I've never admitted that on the podcast before because I don't want people... I was afraid that people would think I was slamming the book by saying I couldn't finish it. And I actually told Megan this myself. But I think I actually know how I want to say it now so that I can say it properly. It's a beautifully written book. And it actually wasn't the infidelity for me that I couldn't take. It was the daughter dying because I have two little girls. That's really tough, yeah. And so I regret that I wasn't able to finish it. It also doesn't help that I was reading it at the same time as possibly one of the angstiest other books I've ever read. It is really beautifully written. And so even though I couldn't finish it, I do think that people should consider it. I really admire Megan's writing because all of her books are so different. And she is not afraid to tackle difficult subject matter head on. Like, she dealt with the death of a child and cheating in the same book.
Exactly.
Like, that's like the Lesfic bravery Olympic gold medal right there.
Exactly.
So, yes, I would echo that people should definitely check this one out. I just think it's incredibly well done. I did skip to the end because I also am a skip to the end reader. Don't send me hate mail about that. It's part of my anxiety management. Leave me alone.
Well, at least you know how it ended then.
Right?
Which is a good thing. And it's a very heavy book. It's a heavy read because of those two pieces, because they're triggers for people, and to be honest, because they're written so well. If you just took those same two topics, put them in the same book and glossed over them, it wouldn't be a big deal. But
no,
Ullrich writes them so well and so deeply without getting into wallowing in it. She finds that perfect balance in writing them that, make you definitely feel them both, but you don't get so bogged down in them and pulled down in them that, you can't find your way out. And, I'd recommend for you, Tara, that you try again at some point as your girls are older.
I probably will.
Because I read it, to be honest, my kids were completely grown and I didn't have grandkids yet. Because
that makes a big difference.
It makes a big difference. If I had tried to read it when my daughter was young, or when, like now, if now was my first experience with it, I would have a very difficult time because I have children in my life at that age. And so...
Yeah, I'm planning on coming back to it.
It is a phenomenal book.
You're listening to The Lesbian Talk Show. TheLesbianTalkShow.com, your hub of podcast information.
So my next book is Behind the Green Curtain by Riley LaShea. And the blurb is, when Caton's sleazy boss offers her a position as his wife's personal assistant, she accepts the job with reservations, certain Jack Halston has ulterior motives. After meeting Jack's wife Amelia, though, it's Caton's motivations that begin to unravel. As vicious as she is beautiful, Amelia threatens Caton's position and her sense of decorum. As the attraction between the two women spirals into a torrid affair, Caton is drawn deeper into Jack and Amelia's world of privilege and prestige where everything is at stake and nothing is what it seems. First of all, I'm going to say I don't know if I'm pronouncing Caton's name correctly or not, but that's the pronunciation that I'm going to go with. This is actually an erotic novel, and it's one of my favorite erotic romances ever. I was like speed reading my way through most of it to get ready for this podcast, and it's really interestingly done. It's really dark, and even though it's erotic and like the sex is definitely happening on the page, the language is also gentler than most erotic romances. Most of it is told from Caton's perspective, and so a lot of the time there's this like wondering, like, what is up with her mercurial boss, like with Amelia. And then every so often we get little scenes that are from Amelia's perspective where we get to find out that she's much more tender than she lets on, that we get to see why she's so guarded. She's in this terrible marriage. And the thing that's interesting that's not clear from the blurb is actually, not only is it Amelia cheating on Jack, which is fine. Jack is a complete asshole, possibly also a sociopath, which makes it very easy to, like, you know, like, fuck that guy. No, don't fuck that guy. Like, he's terrible. Like, just, his ending is A++. I'm very happy with what happens to him at the end. But Caton has a girlfriend who is perfectly lovely. She's, like, quite wonderful. And Caton and Laura have this, what seems to be like a really, actually quite, like a really great relationship. But Caton also can't stay away from Amelia. There's just something there, this, like, magnetic attraction between them that is highly charged and highly sexual at first. And it's interesting rereading it also after the Me Too movement. Because Jack is that total, like, the boss who sleeps with all the women that he can. But there's also, like, a power dynamic between Amelia and Caton, because Caton is working for Amelia as her assistant. And I would say the consent is fairly dubious at first. Amelia doesn't, it doesn't feel like outright assault or anything like that, but because of the power dynamic and because so much of it is unspoken, it just adds this, like, extra layer of tension that maybe wasn't there before. And the other thing that I think it does beautifully that I don't think I've seen elsewhere is that for the first third or more of the book, a lot of their conversation almost happens with the sex. Like, that's how the relationship develops, because they don't talk to each other. They just kind of go from encounter to encounter. And so, like, they don't even kiss until they've slept together several times. And then when they do, like, the first time they kiss is this massive moment, which, I don't know, like, it just, I think I was kind of all over the place, just, like, dropping elements that I love about this story, but it's kind of one of those that, I've read this is probably my fourth time reading it since I first read it a few years ago. And first of all, I don't read books that many times because I don't have time for that because I'm reading too many books for review. But it's still, like, I just feel myself being propelled through this book. It's so interesting and it's so good. And again, Caton knows that cheating isn't okay. And she feels bad about what she's doing with Laura. And also, she can't not do it at the same time. And I just think that's really, especially the way that's juxtaposed with, like, Amelia's just in a terrible marriage. Jack is a terrible man. So it's almost that, like, the understandable infidelity versus the, what some would see as unforgivable infidelity. And seeing those together in the same book, I think works really well. And I know that for people who are, like, 100% against cheating books, this probably isn't going to be the book for them, but I would still challenge them to check it out anyway, because it's a beautiful book.
Well, I'm sold. I'll be reading it. I haven't read it yet. I've heard a lot about it. I've heard you talk about it a lot, and I've also heard other people bring it up, and it's one of those ones it's been on my to be read list for quite some time, and I just haven't done it yet. But after what you just said, I'm hooked. I'll be getting it. So.
Okay, well, I want to know how you feel about it when it's done.
I will be sure and tell you about it. But one of the points that you brought up that I want to address in this podcast is when you said Caitlin is the one that's with Laura. Is that right?
Oh, Kate. Yeah, Caitlin. Yeah.
When you said she just can't not do it with Amelia. She's conflicted about it and she doesn't feel good about it, but she just can't stay away. And that happens sometimes. And it's one of the things that a lot of the readers that are very, very opposed to cheating in books and that have a very strong reaction to it. It's one of the things that they don't believe, that they believe that, in all situations, you can just turn around and say no and walk away. And maybe later in your life, as you're more evolved, maybe you could, but in the moment, sometimes you can't. And that not just with cheating.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've all had things in our lives that we've done that we regret, and that later on, as we grow and evolve, there are things that I've done in my life that I wouldn't do now. And I know
Yeah.
I wouldn't do them now, because I understand more about myself. I understand more about life. I've grown, I've evolved. There are things I just wouldn't do now. But at the time I did them, it really was the best I could do.
Yes.
And so with that understanding around infidelity, sometimes that's the case. And sometimes we have to do things in order to learn what we need to learn in that moment. And they're not always good things. They're not always things that we're going to be proud of in our lives. But we learn from them if we're paying attention. If we're not, we'll do them again. But, if we are paying attention, we will learn from them, and we'll learn what we needed to learn from them, and we'll move on, and we won't do them again. But we have to have that experience. And in infidelity, I think that's the case. Sometimes, not always. But, in the case of what you're speaking about, your point that you made about Kate and Laura, it sounds like that's the case. Because those are the moments that even though given what you've promised somebody, you shouldn't be doing something, there are those moments sometimes that a person just cannot walk away. And in my opinion, and granted, this is again all my opinion, that's what those moments are. So
yeah. So your last book.
My last book is actually several books. I thought it was just French Kissing 1, but as I was preparing for this podcast, I realized that there is infidelity that takes place in French Kissing 1, and then because Harper Bliss deals with it so thoroughly, it crosses over into French Kissing 2. And then there's some additional infidelity that takes place in French Kissing 2 that crosses over into French Kissing 3. So generally speaking, I'm going to be blurring those books. The whole French Kissing series, go ahead and read the blurb for French Kissing 1, and then I'll speak to the rest of it.
Yes. I think I wrote this blurb. Is that right?
You wrote it?
Okay. So this is the blurb from my review of the first season, or first book, of French Kissing. French Kissing Season 1 by Harper Bliss is a serial lesbian erotic story that is like a soap opera. It takes place in Paris with the PR agency Barbier and Cyr at the center of all the action. Juliet and Claire are former lovers turned best friends who built Barbier and Cyr together at a cost to their personal lives. Juliet's decade-long relationship with her partner Nadia is on the rocks. Claire hasn't had a long-term relationship for years, even if she's had great success with one-night stands. Their employee Stephanie continues to be the belle of the lesbian bar scene, which is exactly the way she likes it. When Nadia sets Claire up with Margot, a trauma surgeon from the hospital where she works, it looks like Claire may have finally found the one woman who can tie her down. Then Steph's preference for the single life is tested when she's assigned to work with the high-profile darling of conservative French politics, Dominique Laroche. Okay, before we get to the cheating, I'm just getting to Claire. I adore Steph and Dominique. They are probably my favorite of all of Harper Bliss's couples, and I'm just a massive fangirl for them. So this is...
What do you like about them?
Oh, I love them.
What specifically draws you to them?
There's a couple things. I love age gap romances, first of all. And so that has that going on. And I also kind of love the idea of the politician with the party girl. It just works really well.
Yeah, they're a really fascinating couple, and talk about seemingly opposites attract. They're really good. But I was just curious what specifically you liked about them. And I do want to say, before we get to the infidelity piece, there is so much going on in these books, in all the French Kissing books, because they follow, there's three, well, in the first three books, there's three relationship stories going on all at the same time, plus all of the intertwining friendships, which are also can get very complex. And then I believe in book 4, a new relationship couple is introduced that is a carryover from the Pink Bean series. Have you read 4?
Yes. So By 4, Juliet and Nadia's story is pretty much tied up, so they appear as side characters, but they're not mains in it anymore. We do see, I forget the name of the couple.
Pink Bean.
From Pink Bean.
I
Yeah,
can't remember
it's the Pink Bean book.
The book is This Foreign Affair. It's the romance couple from This Foreign Affair. I don't remember their names off the top of my head, though.
Yes, because one of them is from France and the other one moves to France to be with her. So they're there, but we also see a new relationship with someone on Dominique's staff. I think it's like her assistant? Basically her exactly, her right-hand person, who falls for kind of almost like the equivalent of a lobbyist in the US, who's like a sex-positive feminist, whatever, which is kind of the opposite of like what somebody involved in conservative politics wants to get involved with publicly.
Kind of like Steph.
Yes, kind of like Steph. The other cool thing about this is the first season in particular, which I think deals with like the effects of infidelity the most strongly. It was actually released serially. So each chapter was titled as an episode. So the idea of it being a season, like it was released episode by episode. So I was reading it as it was coming out. And I think it was coming out weekly or bi-weekly, by which I mean every other week, not twice a week. Because it's the same word to mean both things, which is stupid.
Actually, it's a bi-weekly. Bi-weekly is twice
it's
a
both.
week. Semi-weekly is every other week. It can be both. Okay.
Anyway,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. That's one of my language pet peeves that someone from work has put on me. But yeah, so it was released that way. So it was a really interesting way to read it because it is just like a soap opera where you end and you're like, what's
I couldn't read it that way. I'm glad I did. I'm glad I got it all together. That would have driven me nuts. So, do you want to talk about why you chose it? I chose it because of what you said. You said that season 1 is the one that deals mostly with the effects, but I just reread 1, 2, and 3, and found season 2 is also still dealing a lot with the effects. It's just the effects of a different couple. Season 1 deals with the effects following one couple's experience with it, and then season 2 deals with it from the perspective of another couple. And that's one of the things, that's the main reason I chose this book, because Harper Bliss does such a thorough job of exploring those effects very deeply. And even to the degree that with one of the couples, and I don't know if I should mention the names because that gives away too much, right? Yeah. So with one of the couples, the infidelity takes place and they have their upheaval over it. And then the partner that is cheated on appears to come to terms with it. You know, she consciously does some work around it, and she decides she wants the relationship. She still loves her partner and all that. And so at the end of season 1, the end of the first book, you think it's all tied up, and then you start book 2, and it's a couple months after the end of season 1, and all this stuff has resurfaced for her. All the stuff, I mean, she thought she'd forgiven it all. She thought she'd set it aside. She thought she'd chosen her love, and she still very much loves her partner, which is what makes her conflict so palpable, because she does still love her partner deeply. And she's trying so hard to make it work. And she just, at that time, she just can't do it. She tries and tries and tries. And there are parts of the relationship that still work for her. But the sexual part of the relationship, she can't get past the infidelity. And Harper Bliss goes so deeply into that, so much so that they break up again. And then she herself has to go out and have sex with somebody just to prove a point. And that does sometimes happen, that whole revenge sex thing that is so destructive and so hurtful. And yet at the same time, if that's what you just really have to do, then that's what you really have to do. And the other thing that I find unique about the way the infidelity is handled in this book is Harper Bliss explores the effects that the infidelity in a friendship group like that can have on the friend relationships. Where, because everybody would expect it to have an effect on the partnership between the person who cheats and the person who's cheated on. But we don't think sometimes about the peripheral people in our lives and how they're impacted by it. And there's one situation in particular, that situation where the long-term friendship is really jeopardized and put to the test by the choices that are made around the infidelity issue. And so that's another thing that I thought was, it's like I said, Harper Bliss handles it so thoroughly. And granted, she has 3 books to do it, which is good. But, that doesn't happen very often. Usually infidelity is only viewed in terms of what effect it has on the romantic relationship that's at the center of it. And so I thought that was impressive too. And just the writing of the books, like I said, they're all very quality books. And there's so much more going on in the books as well. You have each thing. I mean, Stephanie and Dominique, they have their own stuff going on that really has absolutely nothing to do with infidelity. So the infidelity piece in this conversation and in this podcast, it sounds like it's the whole book, where it really isn't. It's just a part of everything that happens. And so, I'm so glad I chose French Kissing, the books and the book 1 and the series for this podcast, because it's given me the opportunity to re-listen to the audiobooks, which are just phenomenally done. They're narrated by Abby Craden, and they are just so good. And so that's this whole last week I've been, in addition to, as I'm doing other stuff, I'm listening to these books, and I'd forgotten just how much I loved them. And so I recommend them very highly. The character work in it is just, in all of them, are just exquisite. The relationship dynamics are so well done. You get to be in Paris. They're set in Paris, which is, a beautiful setting. And so I don't know. I just, I love these books. And I love the way the infidelity is handled, because it's handled, in my opinion, so honestly. It's just so raw at some points. And I love that kind of writing. So that's my third one.
I'm with you. My third one is Planning for Love by Erin Dutton. And the blurb for that is, Faith McKenna is a wedding planner and she's damn good at her job helping brides achieve the weddings of their dreams. She doesn't believe in marriage or happily ever after, though, so she's more than happy to oblige if a bride's dreams include one last fling with a woman before settling down for the rest of her life. Rachel Union is shocked and horrified when she walks in on her very straight best friend Violet getting down with her wedding planner. Against her better judgment, Rachel agrees not to tell Violet's fiancé under the condition that Faith makes sure Violet walks down the aisle. Rachel doesn't trust Faith and doesn't know what to think about Violet, so she watches them with an eagle eye to ensure their botched tumble doesn't get a second chance. Despite their first meeting, Rachel finds that the more time she spends with Faith, the more she sees that Faith is funny, lovely, and someone Rachel can't seem to get out of her mind. So the reason I chose this one is that I thought it was really interesting to see how a relationship can develop with Rachel knowing that Faith helped Violet. I'm trying to figure out the right way to say it. Like, she knows that Faith helps brides cheat on their partners. She's a part of that. She's enabling it, empowering it, or whatever. And Rachel is totally horrified by it. She hates it. She doesn't trust her. She doesn't think she's trustworthy. It's that fairly typical response to cheating that we see. But at the same time, seeing that from there, someone can come to understand, oh, you are more than that one particular action that you've taken many times. That she is still a whole person. And to see how a romance can grow out of that, I thought that was quite a challenge.
That is a challenge, yeah.
For Erin Dutton to take on. Yeah, it was really interesting to see them both change and grow, because for Faith, her growth was about realizing that, you know what, maybe happily ever afters aren't all bullshit. Like, maybe it is something that she could have as well. And for Rachel, she had to grow so that she could, first of all, stop being so rude to Faith, because she was a total jerk to her for quite a long time. But she had to have a pretty big change of heart so that she could learn to respect her and care about her and eventually love her.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's not an enemies to lovers story, but there's definitely like a really big hate to love thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it just works so well. And I had a really hard time putting that one down because of it, because I liked it so much.
You know, what you said about the challenge that is for an author, that's true, because it sounds like what she did was she started out with a very potentially unlikable character, and then, you know, gave herself the challenge of turning that unlikable character into somebody that not only her other main character has to fall in love with, but the reader has to fall in love with as well. And so to be able to write that effectively, you really have to be able to write a fully blown, fully developed person. You can't skimp if you've given yourself that challenge as a writer. You've got to show that character has to step off the page and move in with the reader in order for that to happen. And that's not always easy to do. And especially if you, in the beginning, the first thing you present is the very part of that character that many readers are going to dislike. You know, it's one thing to dangle out the pieces that make the character lovable in the end initially, and then show some darker sides of them. But to put that side out right up front, that's brave. That takes some courage on an author's part.
Oh,
but
yeah.
You know, Erin Dutton's a strong writer. I like quite a few of her books. I haven't read this one yet, but I've even reviewed a couple of her books, and you know, she's a strong writer. I like her. She does really good character work.
So before we wrap this up, I want to give an honorable mention to a few books that didn't make it to the podcast, in case people are still with us and they think, you know what, I want to try those and I want a few more books. You never know.
Yeah, we might have one listener left.
Right? We might.
But we might have hundreds too. We might have, you know, made our point effectively.
I think so. I am drawing this out because I just want to confirm that this one book that I think is a cheating book is actually a cheating book. Yep. Okay. So I want to give just an honorable mention to, so there's The Fling by Rebekah Weatherspoon.
I just read that.
Can
I say something about that?
What do you think?
I don't think, you know, yes, put it on this list, and yes, you know, maybe we'll take a poll of all the people who read it after this podcast, but I don't think that's a cheating book because they had an agreement. And, you know, that's another thing about cheating. You know, it's like, I don't know. I know people have called that a cheating book, but they had an agreement. The couple did. So I just wanted to say that.
See, the thing I think interesting there is that she thought they had an agreement. He didn't think it was real.
Well, I think he just denied it because he got mad at the end. But anyway, yeah. It's a very good book, though. I did enjoy the book.
Mm-hmm. Also, this one is definitely a cheating book, and it's Does She Love You by Rachel Spangler.
I have heard about that one, yeah. I haven't read that one.
That is a really interesting one because we get the perspective of, so it's a couple that's married, and one of them is in sales and travels a lot, and she started a long-term relationship with someone else in another city, and it blows up in all their faces. And we get the perspective of all three of them. And that's a very, very good book that I highly recommend. And one other one that I haven't read, but I know other people really enjoyed, was Miles Apart by A.L. Brooks.
Oh, okay. To look at that one. I like A.L. Brooks. I like her books.
Very good. So, Jeannie, where can people find you online if they want to connect with you?
They can connect with me through my website, which is simply www.jeannielevig.com. And from there, you can read about all my books. You can, as soon as I get it updated, you can find out what's going on in my life. And you can email me directly from there. You can also find me on Facebook. Just under Jeannie Levig is my personal account, which is perfectly fine to friend me through. Or if you want to connect with only my author persona, you can like my Jeannie Levig's books page on Facebook. And you can also find me on Twitter under just @Jeannie Levig. Very simple. And I think those are the main places to find me. And I love hearing from readers, and I'd actually love to hear from people on this podcast if you have something to say. So feel free.
Mm-hmm. So that's all for this episode. Thank you so much, Jeannie, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for tackling this topic. I think it was, it's like we said in the beginning, it's so controversial, but I think, there are good books out there that deal with the subject matter, and I think there are getting to be more and more good books out there that deal with the subject matter. And so, I thank you for being willing to do this podcast.
Well, I think it's important.
I do too, because it does happen. And like I said, sometimes we can learn so much from a well-written account of anything, really, so this is no exception. So thank you.
I'm Tara, and you've been listening to Let's Do Books. Remember to email me at tara@thelesbianreview.com with your questions or comments. And if you're an author who's interested in joining me on the show to talk about the lesfic you love or trends that have you interested, please let me know. If you've enjoyed this episode, please check out the show notes where you'll find a Patreon link for The Lesbian Talk Show, or visit patreon.com/thelesbiantalkshow. Our patrons get exclusive content like bonus podcasts that no one else gets access to. You can also join our Facebook group, The Lesbian Review Book Club, to talk about these books and anything else you're reading and loving. To find this and many other great shows, all you need to do is search for The Lesbian Talk Show on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, or Spotify. That's it.
What do you think? Did we do it all right?
It was good.